back reading Emergent Strategy by Adrienne Maree Brown. And today we are reading about conversations. So I think there's some back and forth conversations here. And then there's an assessment. I'm trying to see, yeah, okay. Great. So we'll probably just do the conversation section today. And it is really toasty here in Portland. I think it's supposed to be 95 to 98 on the 4th of July, which is only a few days away. So I'm reading early so that I can get in and out of here and then go run some errands and be in air conditioning. So let's do this. Conversations. I met Grace Lee Boggs when she was 92 and slowly grew a friendship with her, a friendship imbued with the mentorship that happened across a 63-year age gap. We mostly built our friendship in her living room, but I also got to attend a beloved community gathering with her in Shea Howell, which remains to me one of the most incredible and intimate experiences I've ever had with other humans. Grace was difficult, exacting, funny, furious, curious, and believed in her right to assert her ideas, her critiques, her visions in the world. Grace had core questions she asked for decades of everyone she met, and she had many answers to these questions, and with her eyes and her attention, she would offer her judgment on how people answered these questions. And she kept asking. She would watch all of us grow as we answered her questions again and again. One of her questions was, what time is it on the clock of the world? My answer to that question has become, time to close the gap between vision and patient practice. Time for those of us who seek justice and liberation to be just and liberated, to be of this place fully. Emergent Strategy is my answer to Grace. One of the biggest lessons I learned from Grace in the years I spent sitting in her living room, reading her work, bringing loved ones to meet her, including my parents, whom she wrapped around her finger, and singing to her, is that conversation in a crucial way to explore what we believe and to make new understandings and ideas possible. In my ideal world, we would sit down together and talk through all of these things. Instead, I'm going to share a series of conversations that I had in the course of creating this book, conversations with people whose work and ways of being excite me. I hope you can weave yourself into these conversations, which bring the various elements into the complex space of the human experience. I love trees. This is a quote. I love trees, big ass trees. Trees weather all storms because they're rooted. My organizing needs to be rooted in my principles, rooted in the love for the people, rooted in community and a vision that extends to the skies like big ass redwoods. Hiram Rivera. Quote, our fruits are only as strong as our roots. Benjue Tamika McHarris. A conversation on consensus with Autumn Megan Brown. Footnote 1. Autumn is a member of the Anti-Oppression Resource and Training Alliance, AORTA, and is a consensus trainer and facilitator whose movement roles have included interim executive director at Reclaim, founding member of Rock Dove Collective, and board member of Common Fire. She is a mother, theologian, writer, artist, and one of my sisters. Okay. This will be Adrienne and then Autumn. Adrienne, would you describe yourself as an emergent strategist? Autumn, definitely. Over time, as I've learned about the approach through your workshops and through experimenting, I've recognized that it feels not only aligned with my theory of change, but also that emergence has its own momentum, which means that it happens anyway, regardless of how structured I I tend to be. Beautiful. I think consensus is a beautiful way to be in emergent practice together. Could you share a bit about how you approach consensus? I think part of my approach to consensus is that I recognize it as our normal human orientation. We are innately cooperative and social beings. I often tell my students that there is a reason humans are born able to move, dress, eat on their own, unable to protect themselves. We were born unable to move, dress, eat on their own, unable to protect themselves. We are born into relationships of dependence and interdependence. It's what we long for, and we struggle with the decision-making models and structures that don't support that deepest desire. So part of my approach to teaching consensus over time has been to ground it historically. Because I'm also a history nerd, so that's how I get my nerd out. Great, that is so important to counter our socialization. I share how differently consensus arises within culture versus political movement spaces, and the history of consensus practice in movement spaces is deeply related to feminist and indigenous movement work. That it is work of collective liberation, no matter how often it is co-opted. And then I make people practice and experiment with it so that they understand it is a practice that requires time to build skill, to drop into a different sense of time and space. For me, approaching consensus is very much about, do we have the tools? Are we willing to fuck up? Because people generally feel it's too hard. They do. And part of that is because they want to be an antidote to power. They want it to be an antidote to power, and it's not. So that would be the other core aspect of my approach, recognizing that consensus does not require equal status. It rather requires equal voice. But truly, it is also hard because our society functions less and less along the lines of what we need as humans to make good decisions. How is equal voice possible without equal status? Asking for a friend. Good question. I think it's possible when there is transparency and when an understanding of status is grounded in a framework of systemic and institutional oppression. Folks need to understand that status or rank is both not accidental, but also not individual, not in the way that we are socialized to think about status, to think status is. When we are in a space of collectivity, we have to reckon with what we are consenting to and not consenting to. Once we get to that space, we see some forms of status fall away as people realize they don't have to consent to it. And then we see some forms of status remain as folks realize it's not a threat. When we can stand in knowing another person's power without feeling threatened, that can be powerful in itself. I love that part of consensus actually, being able to really see another person's expertise without being upset by it. That feels so important, like everyone isn't the same, but everyone is valuable. Exactly. And I can really let go and let other people hold their expertise, and I can call it forward and learn. And that is healthy for a group. A group that is always making decisions isn't a group that is always learning necessarily. But learning is an essential function of making good decisions, and in order to learn together, you have to be good at humility and curiosity. Does consensus happen in nature? Ooh, that's an awesome question. That I don't know the answer to, but I would imagine that a lot of sympathetic relationships between different species require consensus because they require consent, watering hole consent. Like after a drought, we all need to drink, so we can't be focused on eating each other in daylight. Let that be for the darkness. That's beautiful. Certainly you see a lot of mammalian communities where consensus is operative. Bonobos, meerkats. I also think consensus is like water. Many paths, but the future is the ocean. Like we can resist, but it is inevitable. We will have to get together eventually. It's where we are going, and not all of us will get there. Lol, my dystopic brain. Well, that's also true. I keep pushing away from utopia. In nature, it's more like we all get our day, our time. Nothing blooms 365 days of the year. Someone told me that. Yep, oof, so real. And our gifts thrive in very different circumstances. I was thinking about that with my singing. Like, all of the times I've sung in public in the last few years have been by invitation, that I am not as likely to do it if there isn't a specific request. So I have this gift that thrives only upon request. I love that. I only sing when shamed into it, or as a joke song. I have other gifts. Isn't that funny? And we have really beautiful voices. We really do. But there are too many things that capture our attention. Yes. Anything else you want to share about how nature has shaped your facilitation, or about aorta? Aorta uses some awesome nature-based metaphors for working with systemic oppression. They have this whole thing they do around giant hogweed. I'm still learning it, so don't feel equipped to talk about it yet. I tend not to use nature metaphors, but that is because I tend to think of humans as a part of nature, and so I focus more on what is naturally occurring in our relationships. That's not to say that nature doesn't influence my work at all, it's just to say that it's not my go-to. I tend to go to human family as example. Okay, I missed a footnote. Aorta is a worker-owned cooperative devoted to strengthening movements for social justice and a solidarity economy. Oh, one thing. I think living with access to a big natural environment has completely shifted my approach to facilitation, because I live in the woods and get this front row seat to the dance of life and death and the big cycles and the way in which a lack of protection and relationship exposes us to danger. It also means I am more likely to go to breath. It means I am more likely to go slow and let things take up space where I used to rush. Living in the woods is teaching me to notice more, because I can see how everything's survival is related to how it's tuned into the space it occupies, its ability to notice, to be noticed. Hey, one more thing. Are you the reason Occupy knew how to use consensus? Well, I'm not the only reason. In fact, one of the folks I work closely with to build the consensus curriculum that I taught for years, David Graeber, was on the ground at the beginning of Occupy, and I'm sure he had a lot to do with it. But I trained hundreds of those organizers in consensus over the years preceding Occupy, so I think of it as having a hand in preparing the way for that to happen. Like, Occupy wouldn't have been as successful and wouldn't have had that long-term multiplier effect across the country if they had been skilled and successful in using consensus. And they were, because I trained them up. Does that make sense? And then I know my consensus tools were being used by other folks around the country who are creating Occupy spaces too. Okay, I need some water. Okay, thanks for this. I feel so proud of this and brag on it, but realized I haven't actually asked you the deal and you're humble about it. Love. A Virtuous Cycle with Jody Tonita. Footnote 3. Jody Tonita is one of my woes and teachers and friends. Born and raised in Canada, Jody moved to the U.S. to co-found an executive direct movement support and strategy effort called the Social Transformation Project. And because she felt the U.S. was a critical place to invest organizing energy. Man. Sorry. It'd be so great if my throat would clear. Okay. Adrienne, what was the impetus for Social Transformation Project coming into existence, and has that changed with time? We came into existence to help build a more powerful and effective progressive movement. Our work strengthens the movement's capacity for collaborative action. Initially, we invested in leadership development and sharing methodology and tools that make transformational leadership and organizational change practices more accessible. Building on that foundation, our work is now focused on building functional, self-organizing networks of progressive leaders who can think together, align around a common agenda, and act together to secure and sustain long-term social change. Who do you work with? We partner with leaders who are committed to building trust, cross-movement collaboration. Wow. Okay, we'll see how far I can go here. I might have to pause and restart another day. Cross-movement collaboration and systemic change. At the heart of the growing network are 22 powerful movement leaders from across issue areas that have far-reaching influence and lead critical progressive institutions. Footnote 4, some of the groups SDP works with: National Domestic Workers Alliance, NARAL, Forward Together, MoveOn.org, Right to the City Alliance, Service Employees International Union, and many more. Since 2010, we have supported them to connect deeply, build trust, strategize, experiment, and collaborate in ways that build power and unite progressive voices. We know that to reach our shared goals, we must grow and evolve the network. To expand, we will draw from the leaders' own networks, as well as our trusted relationship with the 500 plus leaders of the Rockwood LIO National Cross Movement and the Art of Transformational Consulting alumni networks that we connect and convene. How have you decided what to do in the world? When artful leaders have space and support to connect deeply and are challenged to strategize and work together in new ways, possibilities light up at the intersections. We create conditions for this kind of connection, change leaders to strategize in new ways, and support the emergent ideas and collaborations that arise. And when do you make adjustments? We're supporting leaders to experiment with new ways of taking action together, and that requires continuous real-time adjustment. We're using a structured process to systemically track and evaluate the real-world experiments. We're aiming to create a virtuous cycle of aligning, acting, and learning that results in better ideas, strategies, and ways of working that increase our impact. What have you learned that feels important for movement leaders and participants to hear? Movement moments are emergent, but there are systemic ways to cultivate networks and collective capacity to strategize and act together in nimble and powerful ways when those moments arise. Leadership development is an important and strategic way to build relationships and trust while equipping leaders with the skills and practices to increase their impact and sustain themselves over the long haul. Leaders across movements acknowledge that our strategies and ideas are still insufficient and our siloed efforts do not add up to more than the sum of their parts. Our approach to change is too often reactive and haphazard. We are not leveraging knowledge and innovation from other sectors nearly enough. The structures of our organizations, campaigns, and coalitions don't support the kind of experimentation, coordination, and collaboration we need. Our most promising leaders, we know all of this to be true and are finding the way, but they struggle to break out of old patterns. They lack the dedicated time, resources, and expertise to invent new systems and structures and to practice in new ways. Without an engaged and self-organizing network to support their efforts, each leader is left to work alone within the constraints and limits of their own organization's resources and capacities. Leadership development programs like BOLD, Forward Stance, Generative Somatics, Move to End Violence, and Rockwood are bringing leaders together across organizations and movements to seed the kinds of networks these leaders need. These programs cultivate leaders who are emotionally resilient and connected to high-trust networks that can act quickly and promising movement-building projects are emerging from these efforts. We're committed to growing the capacity of these high-trust networks. We want to see them evolve and develop into functional, self-organizing networks that can deepen their shared analysis to fuel strategic action, align around long-term priorities, and experiment with collaborative action, learn and improve their practice. We believe this is the way to build lasting power and make long-term structural change for a more just and sustainable world. You've also maintained an organizing relationship with folks in Canada. What are you learning through that organizing? In the US, I work with networks that are by design 50% folks of color and are led by women of color. In Canada, the spaces I am in are predominantly white, and power is often held by men. I am finding I have no patience for it. I'm not interested in convincing people who have no motivation and little interest in sharing power to do so. I am much more interested in contending for power. There is a huge opportunity in Canada to invest in women of color leaders, to support them to build the power of their community organizations, to build a base that can eventually elect them to political office and hold them accountable. My dream is to support the development of a network of women of color leaders who move into positions of power and organize those institutions to work for their communities. I think if we did this well, we could take over the country city by city. This strategy is going to make a lot of people uncomfortable. Getting there is going to be turbulent, depending on developing the capacity to navigate internal and external turbulence will be critical to our success. This is what leadership looks like in this moment. What's on the other side of that turbulence? Why should people keep trying? In the face of daunting challenges, we must summon the courage to believe we are the ones we have been waiting for, take risks, and experiment towards solutions. We're being asked to believe in our inherent capacity, step into the unknown, and challenge deeply held assumptions. For most of us, that's radically disruptive and contrary to how we've organized ourselves to succeed in life to date. If you're reading this book, you're at least considering this path. Why do it? Because you will become the leader we need. Together we will become the leaders we collectively need, and in the process we will continually grow and shift and change to meet each new challenge. My colleague Eugene Kim has this great tool called the Strategy Culture Bicycle. He says that developing an effective strategy and culture is about asking the right questions. Where are we now? Who are we today? Where do we want to go? Who do we want to become? How do we want to get there? What I love about this is that where we are going and who we need to be to get there are married. We can't get to a new destination without shifting who and how we are. This is another reason why networks are important. They give us places to come together to see patterns, learn new practices, ways of being, and reach new heights. How do you ground yourself in this work? I have a commitment I repeat to myself in key leadership moments throughout the day. I trust myself in the face of the unknown. While I say it, I focus on my breath, ground through my heels, feel my back, and remember that all of my skills and experience are available and have prepared me for just this moment. I have my woes, who know that what I am aiming for, are tracking my situation and will support and challenge me. Having peers who share the work of becoming the ones we have been waiting for is essential. And when things get turbulent, I reach out for specific supports like acupuncture therapy and somatic body work. Okay. Basically for being a human being, meditation with Danny McLean. Footnote 5, Danny McLean writes and reports on race, reproductive health, policy, and politics. She is a contributing writer at The Nation and a fellow at the Nation Institute. She is also a new mom in one of my woes. Adrienne, when did you begin meditating? Danny, I was introduced to formal meditation practice in 2004-2005 in Cincinnati. I started going to this little Dharma center. I had never sat before, like on a cushion or chair, and had have someone tell me to focus on my breath and identify thoughts and let them go and give me formal mindfulness training. So that was my introduction. I got away from it for a while. I didn't have a daily practice. I stopped until I moved to Oakland and someone told me about EBMC, East Bay Meditation Center. And I started going to their Thursday night People of Color sits. Spring Washam hosted. She was the first person I would consider my teacher. She introduced me to Buddhism, not just mindfulness. This was 2009. My practice began to deepen. In Cincinnati, the Sangha was very white and older. In Oakland, it felt like people my age, and I related to Spring as a Black woman. One thing that has always struck me was this was my formal introduction. I have words for sitting, mindfulness, and meditation, but I remember my grandmother died when I was 7, and I fully remember going on errands with her, and she would close her eyes while we were waiting, and I would say, "Gram, why are you sleeping?" And she would say, "I'm not sleeping, I'm resting my eyes." I think many people meditate. They might not call it that or see it as such, but most of us have a way of opening up to what's happening around us, turning inward, not engaging in every stimulus. Not everyone calls it meditation, and that's fine. I think for me, so much of it is about landing in now. Stress behind, anxiety ahead. How do we put our attention on now? Breath on now. What is your practice now? I don't have a daily practice right now. I had a consistent daily practice through a difficult period of life for about 2 years. I had a practice and then went through a breakup, and my aunt, she was sick and then passed away. During the time she was sick and going through treatment, I had a lot of fear and anticipatory grief, a term I didn't even know yet, but I have learned is quite common when you fear someone might pass away. I tried to go on retreat twice a year, silent retreat. So I would go on retreat, go to EBMC. Then I did this year-long weekly program called Commit to Dharma, led by Larry Yang, someone I consider a teacher. During that period, 2012 to 2015, I was very committed to a sitting practice, and I needed it to stay tethered to some semblance of being able to find joy, being able to function effectively to take care of my life. During the course of that practice in 2014, it was incredible to have a community to practice with and the sessions and reflections with teachers. It's not just mindfulness, it's also learning about Buddhist philosophy, learning what are called the heart practices. Loving kindness, compassion, joy, and equanimity was a focus of the class. They say one way to think about the Dharma is that they are 2 wings of a bird. One wing is the wisdom practices, the other wing is the heart practices. I think of the wisdom practices as being present in the moment, identifying my thoughts and letting them flow away. The focus is on the mind. But the heart practices are all about the heart. When I sit, I can sit and do a loving kindness or compassion practice, but meditation is a lot more about the mind. The heart practices are a lot more about the world around you. You practice compassion related to other people around you. In my aunt's final weeks, I was practicing compassion, joy, trying to find moments of sympathetic joy in a difficult situation. This past year of my life, I have had a lot of changes and have been trying to find equanimity. So more recently, I don't have a daily sitting practice, but I am much more engaged in the world around me, and I'm trying to consciously bring those practices into everything I do. I would like to get back to a seated daily practice because I think that is the foundation. But in the absence of that, a rooting in Buddhist principles and philosophy is helpful. It shows up even when I'm not on the cushion. Build a bridge for me between meditation and nature, humans dropping into our nature, etc. Have these practices played into your life as you create life? I grew up in a rural environment. When I think of being a child, I think about riding a bike, running all over the place, playing in the woods, fishing with my neighbor. Because of where I grew up, I am really drawn to forests, to sitting in natural places. Gives me a sense of calm. It's easier for me to clear my mind. One reason I like to go on retreat is that they tend to be in these beautiful places, and if you aren't in retreat, you can go on long walks. Last year, I went on retreat in Joshua Tree, and it was incredible to meditate in the desert, see jackrabbits, these huge black crows, and cactus, to feel like the natural world was my partner in my work, my mindfulness. My practice deepened in California. I have gone on retreat more often at Spirit Rock, the hills of Northern California. It's interesting that California has been where I have had the experiences of turning inward, not the environments I am from. But it's nice to get away from traffic sounds, from lights so you can see the night sky, to smell the air free of fumes. The quiet on retreat is hard to come by where I live. My experience being pregnant, acceptance, the Four Noble Truths, there is suffering. Clinging is the cause of suffering. There is an end to suffering. There is a way out in the Noble Eightfold Path. My pregnancy is a process of letting go. Clinging to anything, to fixed ideas of how things should be, how things are supposed to go, doesn't work. I have had other lessons that showed me that, and this is really a really focused way to learn. To be okay with uncertainty, not knowing anything, not knowing what the next day will be like, or next few months, the process of birth, what this person will be like, what their arrival on this plane will be like. There have been times when I am moving through uncertainty in the past few years where my practice has helped me be okay with that. To not feel like I deserve to know that none of us are promised that clarity. You're not all that in charge. Do you feel meditation and mindfulness is important for people working to create change in the world? If this is your life's work, then yes, at some point establishing some practice that helps you connect with yourself and center yourself is vital. Yes, for me it's meditation and Buddhist teachings. I wasn't raised super Christian, but I grew up going to Sunday school, Bible camp, things like that. I still go to church sometimes. There's something about prayer to me that is more devotional. You have to use your brain more. You have to think it through, be in conversation with God. It's wordy. But there is something in prayer and song that accomplishes what the heart practices do for me. What is important is to have something that brings me back to myself in the midst of a bunch of feelings, opinions, attitudes. In social change work, you are constantly exposed to other people's ways of doing things. I am very sensitive to other people's energies. It's very helpful to get away from that. I touch into what I think, what I feel. To understand that our minds are not real, that we are often projecting things that are not real. The practice helps me differentiate between foolishness, noise, things that are not me. Yes, for social work, for social change work, and basically for being a human being. Finding a community of people to learn from, a teacher, people committed to practice, is really important. I had been curious about this, and what I had done was read books. That isn't the same. You can learn all the concepts, but if you're not practicing, it's not the same. Finding a community, a sangha, is really important. One resource is dharmaseed.org. It's a library of talks, guided meditations. It's something I think about a lot. Having moved back to Cincinnati, there's still the Dharma Center where I learned mindfulness, but I feel so grateful to have spent time in Oakland. There is something really special happening there. Teachers are doing brilliant work around why Buddhism in the West is so white and asking what to do about that in terms of the teaching core and making welcoming more diverse spaces, different sexual orientations and gender identities. That's so important. If you live in a place like the Bay, New York, DC, you are lucky. You can find a sangha that is more like what this country looks like. If you don't, let's figure something out. Finding a practice community you feel connected to is crucial. Okay, whew. If you got through that section, you are really here for it. Thank you for bearing with all my throat clearing and burping and adjustments. I appreciate it. And next we'll be going through it says assess yourself, your Emergent Strategy journal. I'll save this for next time, and then you can assess yourself. And it'll be a little tricky to talk through because there is some questions where you answer yes, no, I don't know. But if you really want to do this thoroughly, you can buy the book. And there's a link below this video where you can do that if you're interested. So I will see you again next time, and I hope you have a good day, and hopefully my throat is a little clearer next time we visit. Bye.